heavy mahogany doors of the Gangnam penthouse swung open with a silence that felt more like a warning than a welcome. Ava Chen clutched the strap of her bag, her fingers trembling as she stepped onto the polished marble floors of a home that felt more like a museum of glass and steel. She was the 8th woman to walk through these doors in half a year, and the air already felt thick with the weight of her predecessors' failures. Inside, the penthouse was vast and clinical, overlooking a Seoul skyline that glittered with cold indifference. She found the boy sitting in the center of a sun-drenched playroom, surrounded by expensive toys he hadn't touched. 4-year-old Jiwoo didn't look up. His silence was a physical wall, a fortress built from the trauma of a mother lost to a world of shadows. Ava knelt slowly, keeping a respectful distance, noticing how the boy's small shoulders were hunched, as if waiting for a blow that never came. "Hello, Jiwoo," she whispered, her voice a soft contrast to the sterile perfection of the room. "I like your puzzles. Would you like to show me where this piece goes?" The boy didn't move, but a shadow fell across the floor, darkening the room. Ava looked up and felt the breath catch in her throat. Standing in the doorway was Kim Hyunwoo. He was devastatingly handsome, his aristocratic features carved from ice, but it was his eyes, intense, dark, and predatory, that made her pulse rabid against her ribs. He wore a custom charcoal suit that couldn't quite hide the lean, muscular power of a man used to taking what he wanted. He didn't greet her. He simply watched, his gaze sweeping over her modest dress and professional ponytail, with an assessing coldness that made her feel dangerously exposed. "He doesn't speak," Hyunwoo said, his voice a deep, vibrating baritone that seemed to echo in the hollow spaces of the penthouse. "Don't expect him to start for you." "Children speak when they feel safe, Mr. Kim," Ava replied, her backbone of steel and moral principles surfacing despite the intimidation of his presence. Hyunwoo's jaw tightened, a flicker of something smoldering and unsettled crossing his expression, before he turned on his heel. "See that he eats. My driver will bring your things." He left without a backward glance, leaving Ava alone with a silent child, and the terrifying realization that she had just entered the den of a predator. In the dim glow of his private study, Kim Hyunwoo leaned back in his leather chair, the blue light of the security monitors reflecting in his dark, unblinking eyes. He was supposed to be reviewing cargo manifests, but his attention was tethered to the small square showing the playroom. On the screen, Ava was sitting on the floor, her back to the camera, her long ponytail swaying as she moved with a grace that felt entirely too vibrant for his sterile home. She wasn't trying to force Jiwoo to play. Instead, she had brought a small bowl of water and was painting invisible patterns on the dark wood floor with a soft brush. For 2 hours, she hadn't said a word, respecting the silence that had become the boy's only armor. Hyunwoo watched his son's small hand twitch, then slowly reach out toward the water. A strange, sharp ache blossomed in Hyunwoo's chest, a sensation he had buried under years of blood and business. He found himself leaning closer to the screen, his breath hitching as Ava finally spoke, her voice a melodic hum that the high-definition microphones barely caught. "It disappears when it dries, Jiwoo," she whispered, her eyes glowing with a quiet, persistent kindness, like a secret only we know. Jiwoo looked at her then, really looked at her, his expressive almond-shaped eyes mirroring the light in hers. The boy's lips parted, trembling with the effort of breaking a 2-year fast of sound. "Blue," the boy croaked, the word barely a ghost of a sound. Hyunwoo felt the air leave his lungs. He gripped the edge of his mahogany desk, his knuckles turning white, as he watched Ava's face break into a smile so radiant it seemed to illuminate the entire monitor. She didn't overreact. She simply nodded and painted a stroke of water over a blue block nearby. The boss watched them, a dangerous obsession taking root in the fertile soil of his loneliness. Ava was supposed to be a tool to fix his son, but as he watched her laugh, a sound he hadn't heard in this penthouse since the day the world turned dark, he realized she was becoming something far more hazardous. She was a light he wanted to capture, a warmth he found himself resenting and craving in equal, terrifying measure. The penthouse was a tomb of shadows by midnight, the only sound the distant, rhythmic hum of the city far below. Ava moved through the darkened hallway, her silk robe whispering against her legs, driven by a restlessness she couldn't name. She had intended only to get a glass of water, but as she entered the kitchen, she froze. Hyunwoo was there, leaning against the marble island with a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie, and his white dress shirt was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, the sleeves rolled up past his elbows. For the first time, the boss looked human and utterly dangerous. The light from the open refrigerator cast a sharp, clinical glow across his skin, revealing the elaborate ink that sleeve-covered both his arms. Ava's breath hitched. These weren't just tattoos. They were a vivid, violent history written in ink. Traditional Korean dragons coiled around his forearms, their scales shimmering with every slight movement of his muscle, while fierce tigers and blooming peonies peeked from beneath the rolled-up fabric of his shirt. A small, dark mark peeked above his collar, a jagged secret against his neck. "Looking for something, Ava?" His voice was a low, gravelly rasp that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. I didn't mean to disturb you," she managed, her almond-shaped eyes fixed on the intricate dragon tail that disappeared under his watch. "The ink. It's beautiful." Hyunwoo set his glass down with a heavy thud, his gaze tracking her every movement with a predatory intensity. He stepped into her space, the scent of expensive sandalwood and aged whiskey enveloping her. He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her face, before he tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers were calloused and warm, and where they brushed her skin, a trail of fire followed. "It's not meant to be beautiful," he whispered, his eyes dropping to her mouth, dark with a hunger he no longer bothered to hide. "It's a warning." Ava should have pulled away. Her moral compass screamed at her to return to the safety of her room, but her feet were rooted to the spot. Up close, the tattoos felt like a map of the man beneath the ice. Ruthless, scarred, and desperately lonely. "I'm not afraid of warnings," she breathed, her voice a fragile defiance in the dark. Hyunwoo's jaw tightened, his hand sliding down to the nape of her neck, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. For a heartbeat, the air between them was electric, a storm waiting to break. Then, he pulled back abruptly, the mask of the cold boss slamming back into place. "Go to bed, Ava," he commanded, though the slight tremor in his hand betrayed him, "before I forget that you're here for my son." The private estate outside the city was a fortress of manicured gardens and high stone walls, but the air felt heavy, with a static charge that made the hair on Ava's neck stand up. She had brought Jiwoo to the garden for the afternoon, hoping the fresh air would encourage more of his blossoming speech. In the distance, Near the stone pavilion, Hyunwoo stood centered among men in dark suits, his presence commanding and sharp. The peace shattered with the sudden metallic crack of a gunshot. Ava's instincts took over before her mind could register the danger. She pulled Jiwoo into the hollow of an ornamental hedge, shielding his small body with her own, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. From her vantage point, the aristocratic elegance of the morning was gone. Hyunwoo had moved with terrifying speed. His custom suit jacket was pulled back, revealing a holstered weapon, and his face was no longer cold. It was lethal. Shouts in rapid Korean erupted as security swarmed. Through the leaves, Ava saw Hyunwoo standing over a man pinned to the stone floor. The boss didn't look like the man who had touched her hair in the kitchen. He looked like the tiger inked onto his skin, ruthless and devoid of mercy. The scent of gunpowder drifted across the lawn, sharp and acrid, staining the innocent afternoon. By the time the sirens began to wail in the distance, Ava was back inside, her hands shaking as she packed a small bag. She didn't stop until the door to Hyunwoo's study flew open. He stood there, a smear of dark blood on his white cuff, his eyes wild and scanning her for injuries. "You're not hurt," he rasped, stepping toward her. "I can't do this," Ava whispered, her voice fracturing as she gestured to the bag. "I came here to protect your son's mind, not to watch his father become a monster. I resign, Hyunwoo. I'm leaving tonight." Hyunwoo's expression shifted from relief to a dark, simmering possessiveness. He closed the distance between them, his shadow looming large against the wall. "You think I'll let you walk out that door after what you've seen? After what you mean to him?" "I won't be part of this," she defied, but her backbone of steel wavered as he blocked her only exit. Hyunwoo moved with the predatory grace of a man who had never been told no. He didn't snatch the suitcase from her hand. He simply placed his palm over hers on the handle, his tattooed fingers a stark contrast against her pale skin. The heat from his touch was an anchor, pinning her to the spot as he leaned in, his voice dropping to a dangerous silken thread. "You aren't going anywhere, Ava," he whispered, the command absolute. "The world outside those gates just became a graveyard for anyone associated with me. You think resigning keeps you safe? It only makes you a target without a shield." Ava pulled back, her chest heaving. "A shield? You're talking about me like I'm property. I won't be a prisoner in this penthouse while you wage a war in the streets." Hyunwoo's eyes darkened, shifting from cold to smoldering in a heartbeat. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit and pulled out a sleek black smartphone, sliding it across the desk toward her. "Your new phone. It's encrypted. Your old one is already being destroyed. From this moment on, your security detail is doubled. You don't leave this floor without 4 men behind you, and you don't speak to anyone I haven't vetted." "You're trapping me," she breathed, her almond-shaped eyes wide with a mix of fury and fear. "I'm preserving you," he countered, stepping so close she could feel the frantic thrum of his pulse beneath his collar. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her throat, lingering just long enough to make her heart skip. "You've made yourself indispensable to my son, and to me. That makes you the most precious and vulnerable thing in this city." He turned to the door, pausing only to look back over his shoulder. The icy mask was back, but the raw hunger beneath it was visible. "The staff has been instructed. Your salary has been tripled. Consider this a promotion, Ava, or a sanctuary, but don't call it a choice. As the heavy door clicked shut, the sound of the automatic lock echoed like a gavel. Ava sank onto the edge of the bed, the velvet trap closing around her. She was safe. She was wealthy. And she was utterly his. The air in Hyunwoo's office was thick with the scent of expensive bourbon and the metallic tang of a world Ava was never meant to inhabit. She stood before his massive oak desk, her hands clenched into fists, her eyes blazing with a defiance that seemed to unsettle the very shadows of the room. Outside the soundproof glass, a security breach had just sent the household into a frenzy. But inside, the silence was a weapon. "You can't keep me like this," Ava whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and a terrifying magnetic pull she couldn't suppress. "Doubling the guards, locking the gates. It isn't protection, Hyunwoo. It's possession." Hyunwoo stood slowly, his movements deliberate and predatory. He didn't answer until he reached the heavy mahogany door. With a slow, rhythmic click, he turned the deadbolt. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small space. Ava took a step back, her heart drumming against her ribs. But there was nowhere to go. In 2 strides, he closed the distance. He didn't touch her, not at first, but he leaned in until his shadow swallowed her whole. He slammed his palms against the door on either side of her head, caging her. The intricate ink of the dragons on his forearms seemed to writhe in the dim light, symbols of a power that now focused entirely on her. "You think this is about my son?" he rasped, his breath hot against her temple. The ice in his eyes had finally melted, revealing a dark, swirling obsession that made her knees weak. "I told myself I hired you to save him. I told myself I'm keeping you here, to keep you alive." He leaned closer, his chest brushing against hers, his voice dropping to a jagged, desperate whisper. "But I spend every night watching those monitors, Ava. I've memorized the way you breathe when you sleep. I've tracked every smile you give to a child that should belong to me. You've become the only thing in this blood-soaked life that I can't control, and it's destroying me." Ava's breath hitched as his forehead dropped to rest against hers. The steel magnolia in her felt herself bending under the sheer weight of his intensity. "Who is going to protect you from me?" he breathed, his thumb finally tracing the trembling line of her lower lip. For the first time, Ava didn't look away. She looked into the heart of the storm, and she realized she didn't want to be saved. The silence following Hyunwoo's confession was heavier than the lock on the door, thick with the scent of whiskey and the sudden, sharp realization that the velvet trap had finally closed on both of them. Ava did not pull away. Instead, she reached up, her fingers trembling as they brushed the dark, jagged ink peeking above his collar. The touch was a spark in a room full of gasoline. With a low, guttural growl, Hyunwoo surrendered. He didn't just kiss her. He claimed her, his mouth desperate and hungry, as he swept the scattered documents off his desk to make room for her. Ava's hands found the buttons of his shirt, her backbone of steel, giving way to a primal need to see the man hidden beneath the expensive armor of his custom suits. As the fabric fell away, the full extent of his history was revealed under the dim office lights, a masterpiece of violence and beauty etched in ink. She traced the coiling scales of the dragon on his chest, her touch light and inquisitive, following the lines down to where the tiger's claws vanished into the waistband of his trousers. Hyunwoo shuddered under her fingertips, his breath hitching as he leaned back against the desk, his head falling back in a rare display of vulnerability. The boss was gone, replaced by a man who was, for the first time in years, completely out of control. "You've ruined me, Ava," he whispered against the hollow of her throat, his tattooed arms wrapping around her with a possessiveness that felt like both a promise and a prayer. In the quiet of the office, surrounded by the machinery of his dark empire, they built a sanctuary of their own. It wasn't the clinical, cold connection of his past. It was a slow, consuming fire where Ava finally saw the physical truth he had tried to hide. As she whispered his name into the shadows, she realized she wasn't just fixing a broken household. She was finally touching the heart of the storm. The sanctuary they had built in the shadows of the office was shattered 3 nights later by the cold reality of the Crown Hyunwoo War. Ava didn't hear the breach. She only felt the sudden, violent surge of cold air as her bedroom window was bypassed. Before she could scream for the guards, a gloved hand clamped over her mouth, and the world dissolved into the acrid sting of chemicals and darkness. She woke in a basement that smelled of damp concrete and old oil, her wrists bound to a rusted pipe. Across from her, a man she didn't recognize, a lieutenant from the rival Han family, sat watching her with a cruel, expectant grin. He held her new, encrypted phone in his hand, waiting for the one man who would trade an empire for the woman currently bleeding from a split lip. "You are a very expensive piece of leverage, Miss Chen," the man sneered in accented English, tapping the phone against his knee. "Let's see how much of soul the boss is willing to burn to get his nanny back." Fear clawed at her throat, but as she looked at the heavy steel door, she thought of Jiwoo waiting for his bedtime story, and the vulnerable man she had held in the dark. The hero complex that Hyunwoo had mocked became her armor. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. Instead, she straightened her spine, her eyes flashing with a defiance that made the lieutenant's smile falter. "You've made a mistake," Ava said, her voice a steady, chilling rasp. "You think I'm his weakness, but if you've watched him as closely as you claim, you should know what he does to people who touch what belongs to him." For 3 agonizing hours, she became the steel in the storm, refusing to give them the satisfaction of her terror. She used the jagged edge of the rusted pipe to slowly saw through her restraints, the metal biting into her skin until her blood slicked the floor. The basement door didn't just open, it exploded off its hinges. The silhouette in the doorway was a nightmare in a bespoke suit. Hyunwoo entered like a force of nature, his silenced weapon an extension of his arm, his eyes devoid of anything but a murderous, singular focus. He didn't look at the men he dropped with surgical precision. He only looked at Ava. When the last of the captors fell, he was at her side in a heartbeat, his tattooed hands shaking as he ripped the restraints away. "I have you," he roared, pulling her into the hard, frantic heat of his chest. "I have you." The aftermath of the rescue was not marked by peace, but by a chilling, systematic silence that fell over Seoul. For 3 days, Hyunwoo moved through the city like a vengeful ghost, dismantling the Han family's infrastructure until there was nothing left but dust and warnings. But when he finally returned to the penthouse, the scent of gunpowder and iron still clinging to his skin, he found Ava standing in the nursery. She was holding a sleeping Jiwoo, her bandaged wrists a stark, white reminder of the price of his crown. She didn't need to speak. The backbone of steel he had come to admire was visible in the way she looked at him, not with fear, but with a quiet, final demand. He could be the king of the underworld, or he could be the man she and Jiwoo needed. He could not be both. Hyunwoo looked at his son's peaceful face, then at the woman who had survived a war just to return to this room. The obsession that had once been a dark, suffocating cage had transformed into a profound, grounding devotion. He reached out, his tattooed hand, the hand that had pulled a trigger hours before, trembling as he touched the soft hair of his son. "It's done," he whispered, the words sounding like a surrender and a vow. "I've handed the daily operations to my council. I'm stepping back, Ava. No more front lines, no more targets on this door." The mercenary had finally become the husband. He led Ava out of the nursery and into the main living area, where the cold, clinical lights had been replaced by the warm, amber glow she had introduced to his home. He pulled her against him, his forehead resting against hers in the quiet of the new empire they had built together. "You asked who would protect you from me," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. "The answer is no one, because I am yours, completely. And I will spend the rest of my life ensuring you never have to be Steel again." In the heart of Gangnam, high above the glittering, dangerous city, the velvet trap had finally opened, turning a prison into a sanctuary. Ava leaned into his strength, knowing that while the shadows would always linger beyond the glass, the man holding her was no longer the monster in the ink. He was home,